neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy Labor Day weekend. So the Bible is filled with relationships that can be loving and caring, relationships that are difficult, that are painful, deceitful, and certainly complicated, right? We can start with the relationship between God and humanity. That, from the get-go, is complicated. God and creation. Try Adam and Eve, right? It was complicated. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, David and Bathsheba. Talk about complicated. There was Peter and Paul after Jesus' resurrection and the struggle that they had to keep together as they tried to figure out who was in and who was out. And then in this morning's gospel, we get the complicated relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees. These two group of people disagreed on many things theologically. They disagreed on how one was to interpret the Torah. What can you do on the Sabbath? What can you not do? And sometimes we know, in reading the Bible, that sometimes those exchanges got pretty hostile. But the reality is, in that world at that time, there were a lot of those kinds of discussions, we should say. And we know those stories, right? Woe to the Pharisees. We hear that a lot. We may not hear the other parts. All we hear is woe to the Pharisees. And those are the ones that stick out in our minds that we hear so often. But there's much more to this relationship between the two than meets the eyes. More to this relationship than just woes, right? Because this is the third dinner party that Jesus had been invited to by the Pharisees. And Jesus accepted all three of them. Yeah, there were some Pharisees who believed that Jesus should have a much more distant relationship with sinners and tax collectors, and certainly definitely not one that would involve eating together or washing feet. And there were other Pharisees who believed that Jesus should wash his hands before all meals, and it not being getting rid of germs, but rather a ritual thing that became more important. Other Pharisees who felt that he should not heal desperate folks on the Sabbath and not allow his disciples to harvest and prepare food on the Sabbath. And yet there were some Pharisees who were amazed, absolutely amazed that Jesus could heal and forgive sins And there were some Pharisees who gave Jesus warning after they heard that Herod wanted to kill him. So this relationship is complicated, right? There's a lot there. And you can find all of it in the first 13 chapters of Luke. Yeah, it was complicated. It was a difficult relationship, which really goes to the relationship between God and humanity. Right? God and our own seeking of power and those kinds of things. So this is the third dinner party that Jesus has attended. And Luke tells us that this dinner is at the home of a leader of the Pharisees. The dinner takes place on Sabbath. I think if you put leader in front of anything, it's going to make it sound more important, right? So this is a leader of a group of people, which puts you in a place of power, to put you in a place of importance. And Jesus was given this invitation knowing exactly what he was going to walk into, right? This was a dinner for the social elite. This was a dinner for the influential, for the powerful, and probably more than a few rabbis, admired rabbis, right? Like Jesus. And yet even among the social elite, there's a hierarchy of importance. We see that in groups all over the place in our society. Social ranking was a commonplace in Greco-Roman society, and meals were situations that particularly kind of like shined light, highlighted disparities in the first century world. Our reading, our gospel this morning is Luke 14, and it begins on verse 1 and then skips to verses 7 through 14. What we skipped over was Jesus kind of making things even worse because he was on his way to this dinner of the elite. He's approached by someone who wants to be healed, which he does. He heals that person. Again, this is on the Sabbath, so he's walking into a lot. And for sure, word of this healing had to have been the top of the conversation by the time Jesus arrives for the dinner. Luke tells us that the Pharisees were closely watching Jesus, which sounds kind of creepy. It's like they're lurking, and I don't think that's really fair because Jesus was closely watching them, right? Watching how these particular guests decided where they were going to go seat. Deciding what place of honor they could snag. We don't do that, do we? Right? I mean, I think that in every part of life, we are trying to find a higher seat, trying to move ahead. And truth be told, when we talk about elite, every one of us that are in this room would probably be invited to that dinner, right? We put it into that kind of comparison. So all these folks are looking for these special seats, the places of honor. And Jesus' response, according to Luke, is he tells a parable. And on one side, the point of the story is to discourage those listeners from seeking those prestigious seats at the table. And the way that Jesus explains it is to avoid the humiliating situation of being displaced by someone of greater prominence. To avoid the humiliation of sitting at this highest place and then being told that you have to move lower. And you get up and you go sit down at this table with people of lower status who all of a sudden know now that you think that you're better than them. And Jesus closes the parable with that verse that people have graced in their homes. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Calling on them to pursue humility. And something tells me that humility probably wasn't a virtue that was prominent in the Greco-Roman culture, right? And I'm not sure it's very prominent in our culture today. Did you know that many of the followers of Jesus, after Jesus had resurrected, many of them are marked or called out for their humility? You could find passages in the New Testament that show just that. But Jesus isn't done. And thank goodness he isn't done, because the story isn't necessarily about going lower to higher. Right? To move yourself into a better place for yourself. And he drives his point home by going right up to the host of the party, and he starts addressing that honor and status structure of not only the ancient world, but also our world. And his advice to this figure of power in our story, the leader, works to turn upside down the very system that upholds status difference, not only at meals, but for all aspects of life. Right? Don't invite your friends, don't invite your families or the rich to the meals simply because you know that they'll repay you, right? That they got your back. Keep you connected with all of those at the highest seat. Instead, Jesus calls for inclusion of those who cannot return the invitation, to those who cannot return back what they've been given, the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, those who have zero social capital, right? When you think about that, Jesus is turning upside down the social system that gave some mighty privilege, or let me rephrase that, few, a lot of privilege, and many others, none. Into a social system where everybody is supposed to have enough food and water, and that's not happening right now. That is not happening in Gaza. A place where people don't live in fear, and people are living in fear constantly every day. All you got to do is go down to the immigration courthouse. Everybody there is in fear. A social system that also reaches out and is to everyone, respecting and loving. A system that is expressed through humility. We are called to be humble people. And as God's people, may we humbly seek to live in a different social system, to be a part of changing that social system that is marked by humility, but that humility is also marked by love and respect and inclusion. A social system where everybody has a seat at the table. A social system where everybody is welcome and honored and loved. May we seek to be those people to all others who we interact in our life, with all those who we don't even know, in ways that we cannot imagine. May we seek that kind of humility. Amen.